Well, thank you for making time this afternoon to share with us your thoughts on recruitment best practice and identifying where businesses could potentially improve, or maybe even give themselves a pat on the back. So if you're okay that we go straight into the questions.
Yep, absolutely.
The first one says, what made you think about the other side of the recruitment process and those things that can potentially go wrong? And I guess looking at the potential employees and candidates that didn't get the job.
Yeah, I think there's from many aspects actually, because a number of things can go wrong. But it's to my mind, I'm seeing this is a much more candidate driven market at the moment, where there are now currently more vacancies than there were, more vacancies being advertised than there were before the pandemic. Now, we might see that change over time, but that's how things currently are. But it is anticipated that the candidate is still going to have a huge voice in a company's ability to recruit. And so how they're treated, whether you get the job or not, is going to be really important. And, you know, I think employers are going to have to sit up and pay attention to this increasingly, because they've got that as a challenge, plus the fact that there are clearly areas where there is already a skill shortage to tackle. So I've turned my attention to this because of that context, and an organisation will operate effectively because of the team and the people that they surround them with. And if they aren't able to recruit the talent that they need, then their business is going to struggle. So if they don't recruit in the right way, then that's going to have an impact, you know, if they don't follow a structured process. And I think if that structured process doesn't think about the candidate in that journey, then that's where things could potentially have an impact on their reputation and their brand. So next time they advertise, you know, that it could impact on their ability to recruit. You know, for every candidate that you handle, an application you handle, that could be a further, you know, 10, 20 people that they've talked to about their journey and experience that they've had. So that's why I'm sitting up and paying attention to this now.
And do you think, just expanding that a little bit, that when you say there's more candidates looking for jobs, do you think that in the mind of the employer that can make them more laissez-faire about their recruitment process? Or
no, so what I was saying is actually there are more vacancies than there are candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's to your point about being laissez-faire, it could be that where they had no problem recruiting a few months ago, you know, when we were in the thick of people perhaps being made redundant and the job market being different, that there was a bit of a laissez-faire about things. Well, we've always been able to recruit an office manager. Why would now be a problem? But actually we're starting to see that it is becoming more of a problem because there are fewer candidates. And, you know, we might see that slightly improves, but, you know, if we're already talking about there being more vacancies than there were pre-pandemic, this is going to continue, I think, to be an issue for a number of months for employers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we've covered off number one. So moving on to number two, in your experience, how do you generally think that candidates are treated?
I think generally candidates, I would say generally it could be a mixed bag. I think in a larger organisation, they will probably have more process in place. The smaller organisation may pay less attention to that. And they might be relying less on, you know, thinking about wider channels to advertise. They might think less about how they attract people to their organisation because of their brand. So I think what I would say is it's mixed, but size of organisation will have an impact, perhaps on sometimes the you know, the candidate journey. You know, an organizer, it's all too easy, I think, for an organisation to focus on what they need and perhaps less on what the candidate needs, you know. So when you're coming to an interview, just the simple sort of pleasantries and, you know, about how to find us, somebody who's going to be welcoming when you turn up, through to somebody just being treated, you know, sorry you didn't get the job, you know, but would you like to keep in touch with us? We'd love to hear from you again, you know, are you happy for us to hold your details? It could be just as simple as those things, but you know, it's making people feel that, you know, they're being heard, and I think sometimes that's what gets lost.
I think you've just triggered something in that, you know, when sometimes a candidate is physically trying to get to an interview and the bus breaks down, or there's a hole in the road or something, and they phone to say they can't get there. I think there's anecdotal evidence that the potential employer said, well, if you're not here for your interview, don't bother coming. That I'm hoping that will change, because I think anecdotally there's been a certain arrogance by some employers that it shows it's evidence of your resilience and suitability, that if you know, flag down the nearest policeman and say get me to that interview, that shows initiative. But actually, if you've had a car accident and you can't get there, you'd like to see a little bit of empathy, I think, from the employer before you even start.
Well, and I mean, yeah, I can have some sympathy with where people might have made that, you know, taken that sort of jump in thought. But actually, this isn't going to be the first conversation, is my view. They will have had somebody ring to say, you know, or email, or they have perhaps had a telephone screening conversation before they've even turned up to see you. And it's going to be, you know, you'll have had a conversation. And that will affect how that subsequent conversation, if things all do fall apart on the day, and things can happen, how everyone responds. You will have a much better handle on that candidate, you know, and where they are, and why they're looking for a job.
So I do think that does actually lead us very nicely into question 4, which is, what do you think are the benefits of managing all candidates well?
I think you're more likely to get the right and best candidates, because everybody is managed through a well-oiled process, and they have as much opportunity, haven't they, to say, here's my experience. But they've been treated in a way where they've, you know, you've taken into account certain things to accommodate their needs, you know, you've listened to what they have to say. You may, in terms of the interview, therefore have a much better conversation about what it is that they want from a role. Equally, if we go back to the candidates who perhaps didn't get the job this time round, the benefit of handling that conversation, whether it's, you know, in an email even, but if you've at least had a conversation to say, unfortunately not successful this time, but, you know, we will be advertising again, you know, would you be willing to keep in touch with us, shows an interest in them, as opposed to not getting any contact at all. So and that what are the benefits? Well, I'm going to think that, you know, your organization is sorted, you operate effectively. I'm going to talk to other people I know to say, well, I might, you know, you ought to try and look at vacancies here. So I think it will no doubt improve your chances of attracting future candidates, as well as making the best hire.
Do you think there's something around that generally rejection letters say something like, they either say we can't give you any feedback at this time, but is it a bit of a whitewash to say there were several candidates with, you know, brilliant experience? And
yeah, this is where I have to go, you know, where are we in the process? So if you've gone to the interview and you weren't successful, I think, you know, the offer of some feedback is just good practice, you know, that you've got to that stage. I think if this is about your application, and there are a number of applications that you're managing, you know, you can't give feedback on why they weren't shortlisted. That's not necessarily realistic. You know, there has to be a balance, but they should at least understand that they weren't successful. you know, or if there's a process, how that will be managed, you know. And this is where, you know, you can look at systems to help you, but systems in a way that it still has people at the heart of it. You know, you're not just inputting a CV and just screening for words. There's actually some level of intervention going on here to make, you know, to check information, or to think, well, have we done a response back to the candidate? You know, we can get a little lost in a system and forget the person in the process. So that's what I would you know, be saying to employers to think about.
So are you saying that actually happens, that there's a software system that will screen whether you've included certain words in your CV?
You can use certain software in that way. You can use, you know, to the sort of more of the streamlining of a process is more about, well, actually I can see the CVs, I'm taking some action, and you're just moving their application through a system. And that is probably a safer step than just using a system to just screen particular words and, you know, make a particular judgment. I mean, in all of this, you know, we know that there are some vacancies with high volume of applications, and so there will be some judgments for some organisations to make, but in the back of a business's mind, don't lose sight of the person in that process. It would be my thoughts.
That's absolutely key. I think, you know, you could almost shout that one from the rooftop. Don't lose sight of the person. Yes. So just expand a little bit more, Sally, if you can, on what are the key elements to managing the candidates well.
So I would be making sure you've got a process for every stage of your recruitment, your end-to-end recruitment process. So thinking of it from attraction, sourcing, screening. So that can include looking at the CV, doing a telephone interview, then actually at any interview that you have with the candidate, whether that's by Zoom, you know, think very carefully about how you're going to manage the interview, manage the elements if that person's been successful or unsuccessful, and actually in that last stage, whether or not you want to have a sort of final face-to-face meeting. And this is where we're, you know, thinking in the current times of hybrid working, we might have more interviews in that sort of Zoom environment, but actually really want to meet the person and to build that into the process. And that's something that we're supporting our clients around as well, those stages in that way. You know, and making sure that the person, every element, the person would understand how their application was being dealt with.
Okay. I think we probably could, oh, excuse me, look at questions 6 and 7, and just really draw out of those key elements, which would be the most important.
So is this all of that candidate management bit?
Or maybe there isn't anything that you actually have to do.
I think that some of this is so integral, so interrelated, actually, because, you know, attraction is really important, isn't it? Because how you position your advert, how you position the company, how you convey yourself and what you're doing and why, you know, I'd really want to come and work with you. But actually, if later on in the journey you've treated that person, you know, in a particular way, it's going to unpick it. So I think actually it's difficult to say one particular thing, because I think they are all very interrelated. I think attraction is probably going to be really important in a candidate-driven market, isn't it? Why would I come to you? A bit like when you're talking to a potential customer, what is it that's different? Why would I come to you? And is it what you do, the people that work there that's really exciting? You know, that's something to sit up and pay attention to.
Do you think that's underpinned, though, by the good old communication? because I'm just going back to thinking you could, or forward to, or round to, you could have the most amazing advert to attract some amazing candidates.
I think maybe one of the most important things is to take a step back and look at your end-to-end recruitment process.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you will start to make the connections and you will properly think about the candidate journey throughout that process.
So I'm guessing that in your mind you're thinking that you have seen some mistakes in the recruitment process. So for the benefit of the interview, can you share at least one, maybe a few more mistakes that you have seen in that end-to-end recruitment process?
Just very practically, not telling the candidate when the interview is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just not planning that in, not communicating that. I would also say not having a telephone interview. Well, why would that benefit the candidate? Well, actually, it's, you know, if they have a number of conversations. So a bit of a mistake could be just to go straight into an interview.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, what else have I seen? It's down to emails and communication, so people know what to expect from the selection process. You know, if there's going to be a test, what does that look like? How long might the interview be for? So it's that level of detail that candidates would want to know about, and sometimes that's what I've seen, it just gets forgotten. You know.
And have you seen some appalling tasks sent, whether it's led by the employer and what they actually ask their potential candidates to do?
Yeah, I think sometimes I've seen where it's overloaded, you know, too much or too little. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I've got half an hour interview. Well, okay, you know, that's my only insight into the company. So I've seen a range of those things.
Mm-hmm. So what would be your final piece of advice to anyone recruiting?
Well, I would really take a step back and think about the values of your business. Make sure you have them in the first place. You articulate those, because I think that's really useful for a candidate to know and understand. I think very carefully about the skills that you want and think creatively about those skills.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, is that something that could be you know, do you need to think about a range of skills or just one particular skill? You know, to really don't think, well, yeah, if you've recruited for this job before, well, that person had this skill set, therefore that's what we'll recruit this time. That's probably a little bit of the mistakes I've seen, you know. But that would be my advice. You know, think about what your business needs for the future and not just reflect on what was needed in the past, and actually, you know, articulating those values of your business very clearly to your candidates. They will be really interested in knowing that information, and that could make quite a difference to who you attract and who and how you subsequently hire in the process.
Have you, I'm going to ask you a supplementary one, which I think is related to that, and you've touched on, is that do you, although you're asking the employer, asking look at the skill sets, don't just necessarily do what you did before because you'll get the same result. But notwithstanding that, do you find some employers recruit in their own mold?
Well, I would turn it round and say, so what's the tip and the advice? You want to have a diversity of experience and people working from different backgrounds. I think Gareth Southgate proved that, didn't he, by surrounding himself in his coaching team with people from different backgrounds, you know, some from commercial, some from voluntary sector, some from the armed forces, you know, a range of experience. And that's what will bring the difference in thinking and ideas. And that difference in thinking and ideas could make, you know, can help your business move forward rather than everybody thinking in the same way, because you know, they've all previously been recruited, you know, from one particular commercial background or with a particular set of experience. You know, I think there's an absolute value for having experience and qualifications, but it's got to be tempered and measured, and it has to, you know, bring with it, you know, you would, because you've thought very carefully about how you attract people to your organisation, you will get a range of people with different backgrounds and experience. Because I think the difference will bring, that difference can bring a lot with it in terms of creativity, and you can see a lot of that with those organisations who've been successful.
Brilliant. So thank you, Sally. That was really helpful. SYLO. So I think we summed up what some of the key positive elements, Sally, in from your experience and managing candidates. Obviously, it's the clients or potential clients and future employers of candidates that would be taking your advice on board. Is there anything we can do to help them?
Well, we have a diagnostic tool which, you know, could help them look at their compliance. You know, have they got some of the key HR foundations in place here to help with onboarding, and looking at benefits, and that's part of that recruitment journey for a candidate. The other thing is, you know, to think about your systems, and we have a cloud-based HR system which can help manage the candidate application, but not in that sort of way that I described using AI, but actually moving the candidate through the journey, and to help you know, reduce the amount of HR administration, recruitment administration, but actually still ensure that, you know, you've communicated with the candidate, their record is held securely on the system, you know, and you're managing your data protection effectively. So and obviously outside of that, we've supported clients on recruitment, and would obviously always be happy to have a conversation with people around our approach.
Thank you, Sally. That was really helpful.